move around too much. All right. Kia ora, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming. This is the fourth panel discussion in the series that we've done celebrating National Flash Fiction Day New Zealand. And this one is specifically about youth writing Apparently we're having some trouble going live. Okay. Kia ora, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for coming. This is the fourth panel discussion in a series that we're doing to celebrate National Flash Fiction Day New Zealand. And this one is specifically around youth writing for our youth section of the competition. The youth section of the National Flash Fiction Day competition has been running for 4 years. This is its fourth round. And this year it's been handed over to the youth journal Fingers, Toes, which is where I'm from. And my name's Lola Elvey. And I started the journal in 2015. And it's an international youth journal that publishes all sorts of writing, art, even music sometimes. And this year, we are hosting the competition. And we've opened it up to international participants, which is why we have someone like Penny in the mix, who's from Germany right now. And also, we've made it free of entry. So anyone can enter from around the world who's under 18. So it's very exciting for us. So this morning, I thought we would start out by just going around and introduce yourselves, tell us your names, how old you are, and where you are right now, and then we'll get started. So Danica, why don't we start with you, because you're first on my screen.
Awesome. Hello, I'm Danica. I'm 16. I live in Wellington, and I really like writing flash fiction as well as longer novels.
Great. Next, let's go to Penny.
Well, hi, I'm Penny. I'm 17 years old and I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I really like writing basically anything, poems, flash fiction, memoirs, short stories. And alongside writing, I also really like physics.
Very nice combination. Next, let's go to Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Kennedy and I'm 12 years old, and right now I'm in Auckland. Yep, sorry, I'm in Auckland. And I like writing short stories, and I'm also working on a novel.
Very nice. All right, Freddie, how about you?
Okay, hi, I'm Freddie. I'm from Christchurch, and I quite like writing pretty much anything, but particularly flash and poetry. I'm 19 as well, so.
And Samantha.
Hi, my name's Samantha. I'm 19 from Christchurch, and I usually write poetry. That's the thing that really kind of connects with me when I'm writing.
All right, so we have quite a mix here today. We have some people who write fantasy. We have some people who write, Freddie, I saw that you write reviews as well, which is sort of a nonfiction element. We have people who write memoirs, as we've heard, short stories and poetry. So what kind of genres, what compels you to write specifically about your genre? Maybe we could just go around, or your favorite kind of writing. So Samantha, why do you like poetry so much, do you think? Although maybe that's a very broad question, but just what are some of the general ideas?
I guess for me, it's it's easier for me to communicate, and it's kind of a form that I've always been drawn to. Like, I remember when I was younger, I would just like write it, and then maybe like early high school, I was kind of mixing around with like a bit of different things like monologues and stuff, but I would always go back to poetry because I think it kind of enabled me to write about the things that I wanted to in the way that I wanted to. So like I wanted to observe the world, and it kind of worked best for me to write it in poetry and kind of condense it, you know, and make the images powerful. So it just kind of works. Yeah.
Very nice. And what about you, Lucy? You're actually the youngest one in our discussion right now. Is this, and I wonder, you submitted several stories for our competition and are on the short list. Is this the first time that you've submitted to a competition?
No, I submitted to Toy Toy. It's not really a competition, but it's like a compilation, and I got into issue 16 of that. And I also do Fabo story every week, 2 weeks, sorry. It's just like you finish the story competition, and yeah, also this one.
So what kinds of things inspire you to write?
Like if I read a book and I like something that they say in it, or like a character, I might write something based on that, or like pretty much anything. Like one time I got inspired by a flower, so I wrote a story about flowers. It's more interesting than it sounds, I promise.
No, that sounds very interesting. And Danica, what about you? Your submissions for this particular competition were both fantasy oriented, but do you experiment with other genres as well? Or if mostly fantasy, what is it about that genre that captures you so much?
Yeah, so fantasy is definitely my favorite genre. I read a lot of fantasy, so that's where that comes from. I really like dragons and elves. And I like the freedom because you can almost do anything with fantasy. I mean, obviously there are a couple of rules, but it's quite loose. Like if you're setting it in the real world, there's certain rules you've got to follow, whereas in fantasy, not so much. So I really like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it feels like in fantasy, maybe even more than in science fiction, you can really create your own world, which gives you a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
And Penny, what about you?
Well, I try to experiment with a lot of different things, but I found what works best for me is stuff based on my life experiences or the experiences of family members or people I know. And it might be a bit cliche, the advice, but for me, write what you know has really helped to properly convey stories I hold close to my heart and raw emotions.
That's an interesting idea, to write what you know, and I'm sure we've all been told that at some point or another. And it is interesting to think that really does affect what we know. Certainly does affect our writing, which actually ties into a few of you, when I asked you, mentioned stuff that you read. And I was wondering, what kinds of stuff do you read that does or doesn't affect your writing? Do you tend to write similarly to what you read, or do you tend to just draw sort of this amalgam of ideas from different things that you read? What inspires you in other literature? And anyone who wants to answer can answer.
Yeah, mostly fantasy books for me. I kind of like have a range of books I like The Inheritance Cycle or His Dark Materials, which is kind of science fiction fantasy. And I kind of pick bits from each series I like and then kind of mash them together almost.
Yeah, I read lots of different kinds of books, just like random ones that I find, or like a series or something like that. But a while ago, I got really like inspired by like also movies as well, like Tim Burton movies. So I wrote some scary things. So it's kind of like depending on what I'm into at the time, and then I just write it. Sorry, I didn't really know how else to put that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about films as well, to think about different, I mean, story can come across in a lot of different ways, whether it's poetry or a novel or a film. And they all have sort of similar things in common.
One thing that provides good inspiration for me is Greek mythology, and some of my stuff you can definitely see the influence of that. And I like tying together modern ideas with old stories. Same with fairy tales. So I think the old classics are always really helpful for creating something entirely new.
I had a book once that was all about fairy tales that were told from the villain's perspective.
That's cool.
And I thought that was rather a neat idea because it is taking something old that everybody knows, but trying to spin it in a new light. And people do that with things like The Wizard of Oz. They wrote this book that's told from the Wicked Witch's perspective. So you can incorporate these kinds of old themes into new themes a lot. Are there any other ways that you think about themes that you might have read about or seen a lot before, but you want to do it in a new way? How do you go about doing it in a new way, do you think? Or do you draw on old themes a lot? How many of you draw on themes that you experienced writing what you know to write something new?
Yeah, sometimes I do that.
What kind? Do you have any examples?
Well, when I submitted to Toy, it was definitely a write what you know thing. Sorry, the chair was wobbling. I wrote about because I was in primary school and it was my last year, and they had a prize giving for like the year sixes, and we were told that I was going to get a prize. Turned out it was my best friend with the same name as me who got the prize. So I wrote a story about that, and that was what I knew. Yeah, because it was an experience that happened to me.
Right, that's quite a funny story, little anecdote.
Yeah.
And Freddie, you write a lot of reviews. Do you find that the books that you review really influence your writing?
Well, yeah, I do quite like writing some review stuff because, well, it gives me more of a chance to read, I guess, and read some different stuff that I may not otherwise look at, or like, sorry, let me just, I had it and then I lost it. So yeah, but like with reviews, it's nice to sort of see what other people are kind of doing in depth and like picking up on that and talking about it in a review,
Yeah.
I guess.
How did you get into writing reviews?
Well, I mean, I've always quite enjoyed analyzing stuff and just sort of like talking about like why I like the things that I like and what sort of works for me in stories. So yeah, it's sort of, when it comes to reviews, I quite like focusing more on the positive side rather than the negative side of things. Like a lot of the big popular reviews, like you go onto YouTube and things, and that's sort of what's there a lot. But yeah.
Danica, I saw you nodding quite a lot during that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I've written a couple of reviews, and I definitely agree that I personally as well prefer to focus on the positive aspects of the book and the stuff that I enjoyed. Yeah.
So how many of you have experimented with writing reviews?
I have, because my mum works for Ponsonby News magazine, which is a magazine based in Ponsonby, as the name would suggest. And I have just started writing
book reviews
for that. And I think that I do like to focus on the positive things as well, because
Yeah, I guess it kind of feels like if someone's written a book, they've put so much into it, like of themselves. Do you know what I mean? And you kind of feel like, especially as a writer, like you've got to like appreciate, the time that they've put into it, and like you want to like acknowledge the good things that they've done. It kind of feels like harsh or unfair to be very critical of a book when you're reviewing it.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. It's sort of an important thing to, I guess, the idea that you need to be generous to the people, to to whatever work you're reading. And also publishing work, you have to read it with a certain, you have to really imagine what the person is trying to do. So it is sort of looking on the glass half full side as opposed to glass half empty.
And you know, everyone's going to connect with a book in a different way, and like giving yourself the space to be open to seeing it, even if you're not initially feeling that, you know.
Yeah, it's a very subjective process, and there have definitely been times when I've not expected to enjoy a book, but when I've actually gotten a lot out of it.
Or it's like even with my lectures at university, like the lecturer kind of guides you in the reading of it, and it kind of just opens your mind. You're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even understand, but they were trying to do so much, you know. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So do you bear in mind when you're writing, how much of the process of writing for you is thinking about your reader, how your reader is going to interpret it, and how much of it is thinking just about what you want to write? Because I think everybody might have a slightly different answer to that.
Oh, sorry, you go for it.
Oh, no, you go first.
Okay. Well, I focus quite a lot on what I like personally, because I feel like if I want to make a work that I'm proud of and want something that will turn out really well, it needs to come from something that I'll feel proud of. So that's kind of why I focus more on what I enjoy, because I don't want to yeah.
Anyone else?
For the most part, I write for myself because it's my raison d'etre. I just really enjoy it. But on occasion, like if I'm targeting a specific writing contest, I'll try to write about something that the specific audience would resonate with the specific audience. Like when Hurricane Harvey was in Houston, and that's where I'm originally from, I wrote a poem from the perspective of the hurricane to enter into a contest, and that really resonated. But most of the time, I just write with what I want in mind.
That's also an interesting idea, to writing from something else's perspective, and that can be, and I feel like nowadays maybe this is a particularly relevant topic, because it's not just, you can write from the perspective of an inanimate object, or an environmental disaster like a hurricane, or someone who maybe has nothing, a character that has nothing in common with you, but you try to put yourself in that character's position. So how do you go about getting yourselves in the mindsets of this particular character, animate or not, to write about it? How many of you have experimented with writing about characters that are completely outside of the norm for you?
Well, when I write about characters that do things that I don't like, they like doing sports or they like doing maths, which are things that I don't really like doing, I talk to some of my friends who might like doing those things. Like one of my friends is really sporty, or they really like maths, and why they like it, and then I could add that into my writing. Or if it's like from the perspective of like a cat, I watch my cat and be like, what are you doing? And like watch its behavior, like try and see what they do in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So writing through observation. Anyone else have anything to add?
Well, when I sort of write a character who doesn't really have like much like in common with me, like say, for example, if I'm writing, say, a female main character, or usually I would probably try and like, once I've done my initial drafts, because the stereotype of male writers writing women, I definitely want to avoid that. So, but like, I definitely try and sort of like have like my friends or like my female friends just sort of look at it and just sort of give an idea as to whether I'm doing things okay and I'm not like accidentally being offensive or that kind of thing. that's something that I find really valuable. So
Have you ever written a character? Have you ever written a character that you don't like?
Yes.
And have you ever written? Is that character ever the main character for you?
Sometimes.
Yeah, quite main. Yeah.
So how do you go about what kinds of characters do you not like? Is it a villain, or is it a bully, or just someone who's a little bit off on the side and you're not really sure what to do with it? How do you put yourselves into the mindsets of those characters to really make them come alive?
Well, sometimes when I'm writing anything and there's a character that I don't really like in it, like me and my friends are writing a play for our school and there's someone in it who is supposed to be like the mean girl. Well, we weren't really sure what to do with her because she's kind of like, we're trying to make people not like her, but we also want her to have like witty remarks and stuff. So we kind of just tried to stay away from the stereotypes and give her like a point of difference to like make her seem a little bit less bad, kind of. We're not really sure. So like instead of giving her like pink and blonde hair, because that's kind of stereotypical as like a mean girl, we gave her like green as her main color and like a brown hair to try and set her apart and like give her that point of difference that might improve the character.
Yeah, that's a good point too. To avoid stereotypes, or to play with stereotypes, not necessarily avoid them, but try to add more depth. Like you say, if you have a mean character, make the character not just mean, but you have to add something that we understand why this character is so important. Danica, I saw you nodding again quite a lot there. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got anything to add, but I fully agree with what you said, Lucy. Yeah, that's really important to like think of like points of difference to add interest to characters.
And in your fantasy, do you often write then about villains, like warlords or evil warlocks or something like that?
Yeah, well, when you mentioned characters that I just like that I've made, one person did come into my head, and yes, they are a villain. So I'm still doing some development on her, but I think it was because I hadn't developed her enough and she was just a little bit too evil and I hadn't looked into her motivation.
Do you ever have villains that are, any of you, or villains such as just unlikable characters even, that have some sympathetic traits where you can really empathize with them or sort of connect with them? Is that a goal for you in your writing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I try to work in some sympathetic traits to my villains.
How do you go about developing character in very short writing? And of course, we also have poets in the mix here today as well. So it's not necessarily, but I feel like, and I've come from mostly poetry background, in the sense that I write mostly poetry. But even in poetry, there's sort of an element of character or movement for me. That something is still happening. There's a reason that you're writing this poem. So how do you convey this kind of how do you convey movement or development or evolution in a very small piece of writing?
Well, I think in flash fiction, it all comes down to like every word you use has to have impact because it's so short. So instead of like saying they walked over there, they're saying something like they strode, that like implies character and implies energy as well.
That's a very good answer.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes.
You go. I don't mind.
Okay. When it comes to keeping flash fiction concise, often when I make the first draft, it is so wordy and it just has so many unnecessarily flowery words and everything is just spelled out for the reader. And flash fiction, you don't really want that. You want every word to count and to let the reader fill in the blanks for themselves and not underestimate their intelligence. So the editing process is just so important to strip down a piece to just the bare bones to convey.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I like to start out a character with one mindset, and then at the end of the story they have a different idea of something or the way they think of something, because then it could be like they evolved in that way. Yeah, but I agree with Penny as well.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to convey like a movement or a shift, it's really cool to like pick certain images or pick certain words that evoke like a specific kind of feeling, and then by the end that has kind of changed with some sort of understanding. So like the images are slightly different or like focusing on a different thing, and like the word choices are like quite like purposefully different, and it's kind of nice to like have that development of a poem. I guess that's how I kind of think of it. But you kind of got to start with like just what comes on the page first, and then the editing process is where the kind of form comes in writing short like poems. At least that's how I kind of take it.
How often do you write poetry about characters in a more concrete sense, and how often is it more abstract, or what kind of message does it have? Because I know you're also quite involved in environmental activism. Is that true?
Yes, yeah.
Do you write about the environment a lot in your poetry then? Does that really influence you?
Yeah, no, definitely like kind of seeing things that you're passionate about, or like the environment, and then like historical things about the environment, like, you know, like images of Gaia or whatever, can really help like put forward a message. So it's quite nice to like think of like using art to put forward some sort of like message that other people can take, and it's kind of different from like reading. Obviously just like scientific reading is really important, and like articles and stuff like that, but it can add another layer, because it's like when you read a poem or like a short piece or like a novel or something, you get the emotions and the images that I feel like really stay with people. So it's quite important, especially when you need to like, especially with the environment, like promote change. So it's like, you know, you've got to try and feel something enough that you want to do something about it, you know.
Freddie, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Not really, but I do definitely agree a lot with what Sam said, because yeah, definitely, especially when you've got like a specific kind of cause you're writing about, you definitely want people to kind of attach to the emotions of it. And yeah.
So do you often write with, and this is a question for everyone, do you often write with or maybe not often, but do you feel yourself writing with a message in mind? And how do you go about conveying that message to the audience? If it's more than just a story, but as Samantha and Freddie said, something that has more of a purpose behind it, something that really matters to you on a broader level. How do you go about working that into the story?
Yeah, I do that a bit. Not often on the first draft, but as I go back and edit. Yeah, and I try to do it in such a way that I'm not like upfront telling the reader, this is what I'm trying to tell you, but more like through symbolism and actions from the characters is how I prefer to convey the deeper message.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said about like symbolism and doing it in a slightly more subtle way. Yeah.
Sometimes that subtlety can be really difficult to accomplish.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's what editing's for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good point. So what are your editing, how do you edit then to move on to that side of writing? Do you have a specific method that you've already worked out? Do you know at the beginning exactly how you're going to edit it? Do you have a plan, or what does your process look like?
Well, I read it through myself first, and then depending on how much I change, I'll read it again, and then I'll give it to other people. Yeah.
Yeah, I like write it or whatever I'm going to write. And then I'll get like my mum to read it, get my dad to read it, and then listen to their feedback, and then like take out some of the words if they seem like they're unnecessary, and just go through it and nitpick and decide what needs to be there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's definitely good to have that collaborative process and getting advice and kind of feedback from someone else. Because when you've read it over and over again for a while, it just, yeah, you kind of don't get that perspective of someone else reading it for the first time. So that's always good. But for me, when I write, usually my first drafts are just lots of different, like sometimes like unrelated like images. And so I've got to try and make some sort of connection between them, like some sort of progression. So a lot of the time it's just kind of like sitting there thinking, like reorganizing things to try and find what's like holding everything together. And that takes a while, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Because as the author, everything makes sense to you. So it's really interesting and really helpful to get the perspective of someone else and who it might not necessarily make sense to.
Definitely, yeah, for sure.
And that's again about putting yourself in the reader's position, trying to figure out what it is they do or do not know, and what it is they do or do not need to know. I think someone mentioned, I don't remember who, but someone mentioned earlier, not underestimating your reader's intelligence and leaving enough out so that the reader can actually work a little, because it becomes more collaborative. And that's also sort of difficult or very, very necessary in short fiction, because you don't have a lot of room. You often have to leave out much more than you want to. Or poetry, anything that's condensed or has a form that you really have to stick to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like in the last couple years, I certainly feel like there's been a sort of surge in youth voices, or recognizing the importance of youth voices in political situations or climate change. Do you feel like your writing has changed with that? Are you writing more politically or environmentally or about whatever it is that's important to you now than you were a couple years ago?
Yeah, I guess so, because there's kind of like there's more information out there that you're reading, like on social media or whatever. You're kind of consuming that stuff more often, and you kind of feel some sort of responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Like to do
Yeah.
what you can. And like for us, if we really like writing, that's our kind of method of trying to have an effect or like try and make a change, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I use writing to that's how we can, voice our opinion. Yeah.
Mm.
And the older that I've at least gotten, the more politically aware I've become, and the more passionate about certain topics I've become, and therefore there's more of it in my writing.
I've definitely noticed in Fingers Come Toes, which is the youth journal that I run, we've been going for now 5 years, and at the beginning, or it wasn't so noticeable at the beginning, but now in the last couple years, the number of submissions that we've gotten that are specifically about climate change, some of them from kids who don't even write normally, but they feel compelled to write about this topic, submissions from 8-year-olds to 16-year-olds. And I think that's really interesting to see that, because I certainly wouldn't have expected it necessarily, but I've definitely noticed this exponential increase in kids writing with more of a purpose.
Mm.
So I wonder if it's on everyone's minds.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like the whole effect of social media and like digital culture. I think that really like affects how people kind of are seeing the world. Because like well, at least when I was younger, you didn't like you saw the news at the end of the day, but you just kind of like mostly just went about your merry way, maybe played in the playground, like had a good time. But like now it's kind of everywhere, like kids have phones, have Facebook and stuff like that. So yeah,
It's a lot more present.
Yeah, you kind of have to be, just because everyone is connecting with everyone all the time now, and the information is always there. Maybe, I don't know.
And Lucy, in your case, because you're 12, do you notice this? what do you notice in kids your age?
Well, yeah, like in past years, like at school, we haven't really talked about what's happening around the world or anything. But where I am now at school, we talk about what's happening and what could happen. Like we think more into the future than we did before. And maybe it is because it's more present, like Sam said. So, yeah.
I guess it could also be because it's more like pressing, like it's getting to the stage where like action needs to be taken. So maybe that also has a role. There's some sort of pressure because of how bad things have gotten with like the environment and political things right now.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to add? Yeah, it is definitely important I feel like it's very important to write about things that inspire you, which I think is what everyone here has sort of said. That, and I suppose the more we start seeing and hearing about this through social media, which is a very new invention, obviously, then the more we feel compelled to write about things in our environment, which is what Samantha said. So if no one has anything else to add, then we might go to some audience questions now and see if anyone watching has any questions for us.
Awesome.
Cool.
Here's a question. How do you think writing and creative expression through words corresponds with activism as a whole?
Well, I, for one, think it's a great platform for activism because everyone loves reading poems and stories because it's entertaining, and that's the way you can reach a wide audience and spread your message.
Yeah, it's a really good way for your voice to be heard, because especially if you enter it into competitions, because then there's people reading it, like for definite, there's always going to be someone reading it. And writing is a really good way to spread that message.
Yeah, I agree. And you can make it really powerful as well with how you present it and the angle you take as well.
Are there specific writers who have lit your activist flame? Sorry, this is another question from the audience.
For me, lately I've been reading quite a bit of James Baldwin, and because he was one of the big voices in the civil rights movement back in the 60s, which is getting quite current now with what's happening in America and worldwide. And he's definitely sort of one of those authors who's kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different perspectives and issues in a way I haven't really been exposed to them before. Yeah.
And what about the others? What are you reading right now that's really standing out to you as fueling your passion?
I'm really enjoying this New Zealand poet called Te Tibble. She writes a lot about kind of like politics of race as well, especially like Māori, like being a Māori woman, and also like the whole thing about being a woman. So I think it's just like, it's been really interesting to see those perspectives, like Freddie was saying, that you just would like not understand otherwise, like if you didn't open yourself up to like learning about them. So I think she's really cool because she puts herself in a modern context. So it's kind of fun as well, and it's quite different. So I'm really enjoying reading her stuff.
Lately, I've been reading a lot of poetry by this teen poet called Jeffrey Liao, and he speaks a lot about racism that he experiences as an Asian American, and that has also influenced some of the pieces I've been writing lately.
Another question from the audience related to Te Tibble. how important are wit and irony in your writing?
Um,
Or I suppose
I-
more generally humor to convey your message.
Yeah, I like to have things that lighten the mood of it a little bit. If I'm writing something really serious, then I do like to have something to like make it not entirely serious in a way, because it is serious. Sorry, I'm having a really hard time saying this. It is a serious thing, activism and things like that, but it's also good to have a way to lighten it a little bit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I
dealing
agree.
with-
Sorry.
No,
I
by all
agree.
means.
Yeah. And having like, if you're talking about a really serious topic, adding in like a witty character or something,
Yeah,
lighten it while not subtracting from what you're talking about. It just sort of lightens it a bit. Yeah.
yeah.
And honestly, sometimes I feel like it can add to it too. Like when you make it funny, it's more of a punch because you like the whole thing of like a humor is like you're understanding something that you didn't before, and it's like, oh, that's funny, that connection. So it's like it kind of makes this connection more significant, especially if it's like sarcasm or something like that, you know? And it kind of gives more of an effect too, I think, in a different way.
And
Yeah,
also,
you're engaging more people. Sorry.
yeah, you go. I don't know. You
Oh, I was
say.
just saying you're engaging more people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say. Like more people probably want to read it as well if they know that it's got something funny in it as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Another question. Related to everything we've covered so far, how did you all start writing and why?
Oh,
I don't remember. I think that I just got an idea and I wrote it down because I have okay, I'm sorry. My mum works from home, so she has like these computers, and she had this old one. And when I was about 8, that was in my room. So I was writing stories on that, and I was looking through them the other day, and they're really random. But some of them have like good concepts that I might want to revisit, even though I was like 8. There's some good ideas in there, and so yeah, I started writing basically when I could have a way to save it forever. I don't know, like when I had a computer to write on, I suppose, because I like writing in pen and pencil, but I always just seem to lose the notebooks that I write in. So I'll probably find a whole stack of old things one day, but for now I've just got some random things on the old computer. So yeah.
So I vividly remember when I started writing. I was 13 and there was like a school spelling bee, and I didn't do as well as I would have liked. And so I was sad about it. And rather than let me have a pity party, my mom told me, I'm very competitive. Penny, why don't you just enter a writing contest? You've always said you wanted to be a writer, because I really like reading. And so I wrote a memoir and I entered it. And to my surprise, I won second place. And so that really set me on the track to becoming a writer and producing a lot of poems and short stories and everything. So that was the inciting incident for me.
Yeah, I can't actually remember when I started, but I've been writing for as long as I can remember. Short stories, poems, longer novels mostly though. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the way I kind of write is like I want to write down what I see, and I like don't want to forget the image that I've like seen, or like the way I've kind of perceived nature or people or whatever. Like if something really striking comes up, I don't want to forget it, so I like write it down. And I think I've always been like that. Like I found these books from when I was in year 1, and they were literally like little pictures of like flowers, and the letters were all like LISB, blah blah blah, and then the teacher had written at the bottom, "The flowers are pretty today." So I think I've always kind of like wanted to like write about my surroundings. I think that's how I've kind of done it.
Freddie, what about you?
Well, I mainly started writing sort of around the age of 11 or 12, I think. And I sort of, there was for some creative writing workshop that came into school, and I wrote this poem and they quite liked it, which felt pretty good. And after that, I joined the School for Young Writers in Christchurch, which has definitely been where I met Sam as well. And that's definitely been really valuable for me, sort of shaping my writing quite a bit with like regular workshops and stuff, and meeting a lot of cool people. So yeah.
This leads to another question, something I was curious about. Because in answering this question, a lot of you referenced some of your earlier works. How often do you, how stark is the difference between what the topics that you were writing about when you first started or when you were younger and the topics you're writing about now? And how often do you revisit old stories like Lucy was saying and use them now?
Yeah, when I was younger, I wrote a lot less fantasy, and it was more reality based. So that's kind of evolved over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I wrote a lot more fantasy when I was little. Like, there's one about this random monster that hoards books, and there's another one about apparently I taught my cats to tap dance, which never happened. Yeah, and now I write more dystopian things, but I still do write fantasy. But I feel like it, and also like activist-y things. What's that word? I'm not sure, but I write more other things now, and I definitely wrote more random things when I was younger.
When I was younger, I wrote a lot of like these really depressing gothic fantasy like stories. And looking back, they weren't my best work. But now I write a lot more variety. On occasion, I'll still write a fantasy piece or something, but mostly my stuff nowadays are more grounded in reality and based off my experiences.
I think we'll take one more question. How did lockdown and COVID impact you or others you know in terms of how that you write?
Well, during the lockdown, I definitely wrote a lot more about like other places, like old mansions or a dystopian future or like a tropical island, literally anywhere but my house. Because I really just wanted to go somewhere and do something other than sit on the couch and do Zoom meetings with my class. But I definitely think that the lockdown made me enter a lot more writing competitions than I would have normally entered because I had a lot more time to do writing, which was good. But yeah, I definitely think I wrote a lot more about faraway places that are not here.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote a lot more over the lockdown as well. Yeah, it gave me a lot more time because I wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me,
You go, sorry.
For me, I felt like it kind of like lockdown was really good because I had that time, but then I also kind of felt like I was a bit stuck in my room. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of like felt it hard to write because I felt really like, oh, like I need to be somewhere else and like clear my head to like actually start writing. So I think it kind of had a bit of the opposite effect on me, but also the stuff that I was writing was more like related to the things going on. So it was a point of inspiration, but it was also, I don't know.
Lockdown was really helpful for my writing because I had really bad writer's block for like 6 months or so. And so I finally had the time to reevaluate things and get out of writer's rut and finally start producing stuff that I was actually proud of again.
That's cool.
For me, because personally I've been dealing with, this is my first year of university, so I've kind of been mainly dealing with keeping up with that. So I haven't had quite as much time to write as I otherwise would have, which is why I've kind of been a wee bit grateful in some ways for lockdown, because it's definitely given me a bit more of a chance to just sort of like work and just sort of, even if I don't necessarily have time to write everything, it's at least given me the space to think of ideas and get motivation for the things I want to work on. So yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation, and it's meandered a lot of different places. It's been a lot of fun, but we should probably wrap up now. Also because Penny is in Germany, and it's probably approaching midnight. So thank you again for coming. A reminder to everyone watching and participating about the Monday event tomorrow, which is at 6:00 p.m. New Zealand time, which will be streamed on this YouTube channel, on our on the Flash Frontier National Flash Fiction Day YouTube channel. And that event will have micro readings from new authors, experienced authors. The New Zealand Poet Laureate, David Eggleton, will be there, reading, I mean. We'll have music, and then the awards announcements in the second half of the evening. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you again for coming. This has been really fun.
Great. Thank you, Lola. It's really awesome to have us all like chatting. It's been really fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
You
you.
organised it.
It was really
Thank
fun.
you for hosting.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Bye.